Welcome to my podcast, The Listful Soul, a podcast on spiritual and self experience guidance from my soul to yours. My name is Lisa, and I will be your host, so welcome. The idea of this podcast is to share my experiences in life with you, with a spiritual aspect to it as well. I'm hoping to dwell into different topics over the course of this year, and I'm really looking forward to this journey along with you with your continuous feedback and support. My first season will touch upon the devotion to Mary. I'm very excited about today's episode. I have a guest speaker with me today to guide us through an understanding of a very interesting title of Mary. My guest is none other than Biron D'Souza, a man of God that has such a vast knowledge about his faith. He is an avid reader, though, so I guess that explains some of it. Well, let's see what knowledge he's going to share with us today. So, how are you doing today, Byron?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for saying, yes, and taking the time out to join me on, this episode of my brand new podcast. And, I'm really glad to actually have you be a part of this. When we were talking about in our initial conversation, when we were talking about, me doing the podcast and, I wanted you to be a part of it. So as you know, the season is revolved around Mama Mary,
Mhm.
where, I'm looking to talk about some of the titles that were given to her.
Yeah.
And, the main purpose behind that is just to help a lot of people, myself included, to just get a better understanding of Mama Mary, to get a better understanding of how impactful she actually is and can be in each of our lives.
Yeah.
So, one of the titles that I was very curious about, and to be very honest, I didn't really have any clear understanding on, was the title where Mary is considered the new Eve. So when I was doing, a little bit of my research, I didn't really find there to be any kind of a biblical reference, that says that Mary is in fact the new Eve. There is only a mention of Eve in the in the Old Testament and Mary in the New Testament, but
Yeah.
nowhere does it, really connect them to one another. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on the podcast, Lisa. I've always thought you should have started a podcast because we kept saying you have a podcast voice. So it's so good that you're doing this. It's so good that you're taking the topic of Mary. It's really exciting, and I'm so glad to be talking about this. And yeah, coming to what you were saying about the new Eve. Um, when you said let's talk about the new Eve, I was doing a bit of my understanding or re-understanding this because I
Mm,
remember reading the book Behold Your Mother by Tim Staples,
okay.
which really brought into me a lot of Marian devotion because it was like a clear cut. It's a really amazing book that anyone who wants to like understand Mariology should pick up. I'm
Okay.
not being paid for telling this, but yeah, if Tim Staples ever hears this, please know that I really got influenced by that book. But I think that's even where I get a lot of knowledge because the same thing, the same question, right? I mean, it sounds plausible that she can be called the new Eve, but where's the connection?
Yeah.
And I think I think what he brings out beautifully, and it's not in the Bible, but we as Catholics, anyways, we don't always. I mean, we go the scripture is one of our pillars, but then there's also sacred tradition, and when
Mm-hmm.
we dwell into that sacred tradition, when we look at what the early church fathers, that's like the when I mean the early church fathers, I'm talking about like the successors of the apostles who lived in the early
Yeah.
centuries, like the first and second century, immediately after Christ and immediately after the apostles. And there, when we go back, I think there's this quote by Saint Irenaeus.
Okay.
Okay, and he's a very often quoted church father, and Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. Okay, so he's I think a French saint, and he wrote this somewhere in 177 AD. So he talks about Mary being found obedient. It says, Mary the Virgin is found obedient, saying, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me according to thy word." But Eve was disobedient, for she did not obey, when as yet she was a virgin. And there's a little more to that. And then he further says that Mary was also a virgin, and she, by yielding obedience, so she was obedient where Eve was disobedient.
Okay.
She became the cause of our salvation. And so, Eve's disobedience was loosened by the obedience of Mary.
Okay.
So that's where we see the first parallel as such of Mary being compared to Eve, and also as her actions were the opposite of what Eve did, right? Where Eve was
Mm-hmm.
disobedient, Mary was
Yeah.
obedient. So that's where the whole thing of new Eve comes out, actually.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I mean, and that kind of brings to my mind, whenever we do so, whenever I've done my daily scripture reading, that's something that I've always found, that there's always a comparison made between like the first reading and then the Gospels. And when I was looking up on this in terms of a comparison that's made, I kind of came across um, a kind of research, if I could say, or a practice that the church uses, where certain scholars, carry out this process of typology, where
Yeah.
they make a comparison between what happened in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Would you know anything more about this typology?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and it's great that you brought that up. Typology, and
Hmm.
it's especially it's a very Christian, very Catholic tradition of looking at the Old Testament and New Testament not just as separate parts, but actually parts that like inform each other or
Okay.
from draw from each other. And in that whole context, typology comes into play. So we're talking about, just to explain that typology means like characters in the Old Testament are types. That is, you could say, type in the sense prefiguring people in the New Testament, or like kind of being like an example of people in the New Testament. And that's what, like here when we're talking about Mary being the new Eve, Mary is a type of Eve. In the same way, there are multiple examples. Like one
Okay.
that's brought out in the Bible itself is about how Jesus is the new Adam. So Adam is
Hmm.
a type of Jesus, right?
Okay.
Or
Okay.
Moses is the type of Jesus, leading people, through the Red Sea, which is a type of baptism. So it's really interesting when you try to understand that,
Yeah.
how people in the Old Testament are types of people in the New Testament that way. And I'm doing a lot of inverted commas in the air, which no one is going to see, but when I'm saying the word types, but yeah, that's really what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that definitely makes a lot of sense now, and it definitely adds a lot of clarity to this particular title. Where
Mhm.
and I think it is also in line with what you had earlier mentioned, where when you look at Eve and when you look at Mary, and you make that comparison in terms of what happened, like in my understanding, it was basically where both of them got a call from God, but
Yeah.
the response to that call by each of them was very different. And that's where
Yeah.
you mentioned that, for Eve, she was at the end of it was disobedient because she went against, what God had told her. Whereas with Mary, she was obedient through everything, from the time that the angel appeared to her right up till, till the I mean, till now, I would say,
Yeah.
and the fact that with Eve, there was a certain level of distrust that she had in God, which eventually led her to be disobedient. But with
Yeah.
Mary, I think, she had a lot of faith in God, to
Yeah.
be able to not only say yes when the angel, kind of foretold her what was going to happen, and the fact that, she went through all of those years And to top it all, I mean, she had to literally, stand at the foot of that cross and see her only son be hanged. I mean, that
Yeah.
itself is, must have been a horrible and a painful, position to be in. But despite all of that, I feel like, she is an epitome of faith and, of obedience.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably how, the comparison is made, where one did one thing, but the other person did something else. But the common denominator was, the fact that God called them to do something, but how they responded to it and carried it out was different.
Yeah, I think that that's so right. That they were, their trust was brought into play, their faith. Because when you look
Mm,
at both the statements made by either the serpent in the garden, he's saying like, oh, have this fruit. Oh, what did God tell you that? No, God doesn't mean what he says. So he's putting a very provocative statement over there. Like if for like Eve is like, no, we shouldn't, because it's how can we do something like that? And he's putting a provocative say, do it, because God's lying. So
yeah,
there is the whole thing of trust and faith, and equally when you look at Angel Gabriel also putting that statement to Mary, which is equally scary for any woman to be like, yeah, you're gonna become pregnant, and she's like, no, how can I become pregnant? It's
yeah,
a very scary statement. So in both places, it's a shocking, it's a scary statement, but the response to it
yeah,
is where everything really matters, and it's amazing how Eve goes, really gets misled, and Mary also could have easily said, no, you're talking nonsense, but she's not saying that. She's like, okay, behold the
hmm,
handmaid of the Lord, and which is amazing. It's a lot of faith, it's a lot of grace that Mary is blessed with, for her to be able to say that. And yeah, when you think about, you know when talking about the tree, and a lot of times, the New Testament, Saint Paul refers to the tree as a cross. So Eve's response, and then there's a tree in the picture, and she takes from the tree, and that brings death.
hmm,
Whereas Mother Mary, obeys, and her son is nailed to a tree, and that's what Saint Paul uses for the cross, right? He's nailed to a tree,
okay,
but that brings life. So it's amazing when you see the parallels, not in the stories altogether, that really strengthens that link between Eve and Mary, but Mary being
yeah.
new Eve, the person really bringing life. It's amazing.
Definitely, definitely. Another aspect that I found very interesting in my research is where Eve is described as the mother of all living. And
Yeah,
when it comes to Mary, she's considered the mother of all living, not in the form of nature, but in the form of, grace and in that aspect, I feel that's another interesting comparison to make between the two of them.
yeah, yeah. And just to add to that, I just came across something also, was the wedding at Cana, right? um,
Mm,
Again, over there, there's another thing, right? Especially when it comes to this mother of all living things, and mother of all living people in faith, you could say, probably, is
yeah.
that when once Eve was given into the serpent, disobeys God, she then also puts the same proposition to Adam, saying, why don't you try it, and then leads him also into sin. But if you see Mary at the wedding at Cana is actually going to her son, to Jesus, and saying, they run out of wine, so can you do something about it? So she's also putting a proposition before her son. And
Mm,
what he does, that miracle that he does, he turns the water into wine, and he does that with his disciples, his first disciples being present. And they are convinced that this man is not just any man, but he's much beyond that. And their faith is born, you could say. So Mary, through her action,
okay.
becomes the mother of those in faith, because she's brought in that faith into them, because they see with their own eyes what Christ has done. So it's amazing, right? When you think about it, like,
Yeah.
okay, she becomes their spiritual mother in that sense. So it's and yeah, and we know that Jesus also tells on the cross, right, that to John, like, take, behold your mother.
Mm,
So it's amazing that those kind of parallels. There are plenty of parallels, but all these are like the
yeah.
ones that yeah.
Yeah, it just gets, I think, interesting as you really dig deep to see how this comparison is made. And another one that I have to mention is the whole reference to Eve and Mary as women.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a common word, I would say, that is used very freely in the Bible, for just anybody or any female for that matter. But
Mhm.
there was just this specific call out, I think, to just to Eve when Adam referred to her as a woman. And then like you mentioned just a while ago, at the cross, when Jesus told John, woman, behold your mother.
Yeah.
So
Woman, behold your son. Yeah.
sorry. But, yeah, so that is again a very interesting comparison when you look at that.
It's very funny because you wouldn't call someone woman over here. It would kind of come across as very rude. So when we
Yeah.
read our modern eyes, when we look at the Bible in the context, we might think, why is Jesus calling his mother woman? Even he calls her woman even in Cana, and you're like, okay, it's a little mean, isn't it? I mean, you're like, wouldn't you want him to say mama? But there's so much of weightage why he's actually calling a woman, because he's trying to refer to her as how Adam referred to Eve in the beginning. And also I think it goes into the thing that happens soon after Eve's disobedience, right? Where God tells, when he's kind of judging Adam, Eve, and the serpent, and he says to the serpent, he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and
Yeah.
between your seed and her seed, right? That's offspring. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. So and he's talking right over there, like that's the first acknowledgement of the good news. um
Hmm.
and so there also God mentions between the woman and you, the enmity between the woman. So that we wouldn't think of it, we would just think woman is just another word, but there's a lot of weightage put behind that word woman, and when Jesus uses it for Mary and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the quote that you had mentioned about that Saint Irenaeus of Lyons had mentioned, so I had read another, maybe it's a different version of it, but yeah, the meaning is
Mhm.
still there, where it says, the knot of Eve's disobedience was
Yeah.
loosened by the obedience of Mary. So,
Yeah.
is this something that's connected to Mary, the undoer of knots?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, actually, Lisa, because there is a lot of connection. So apparently the whole devotion, for those of you who don't know, there's the devotion to Mary, Undoer of Knots, who basically it's a novena, it's a devotion to Mary, to undo the knots, and it could be any knot that person has in their life. Um,
Hmm.
so there's this really strong devotion. It's a popular one, and it's based actually on, in some ways, on a painting in the 18th century. I'm not really sure of the name of the painter, but it's a painting where Mary is undoing a knot. And as you rightly mentioned, the the quote of Saint Irenaeus was the inspiration for that painting. So the painter took that quote as an inspiration and made that painting, and from that painting came out the devotion of Mary, Undoer of Knots. So that's
Okay.
amazing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how Mary
Yeah.
is the knot of disobedience. I mean, it's really amazing.
Yeah, and just to call out, so that everyone, all of us are on the same page. When we say not, it is KNOT,
Yeah.
and this is basically, if there is something that is within you that you're finding difficult to really untie, if I can say so, to really remove or just let go or be free of, then this is definitely another devotion that you can go towards, in terms of an intercession toward Mary, to help you to undo that particular knot that may be present in your life. So yeah, I mean, I found this really interesting when I read this quote, and I was like, wait, does this have any connection to that? And I mean, and like you said, it definitely is. So another interesting fact that we were able to unravel with this particular title.
Yeah.
So tell me, Byron, in all of your experience with all of this that we've kind of gone through, um, how has you know, the understanding of Mary as the new Eve, how has this made a, a difference in your life?
I think all the attributes of Mary have, that I've got to know in say the past 4 years. And it's funny because I'm a cradle Catholic, but my devotion to Mary was not so much as it is now in the last 4 years. And of course, I attribute a lot to the book that I mentioned at the beginning, Behold Your Mother. And that's where I first came across Mary as a new Eve. And for me, I just realized how crucial Mary is in the whole scheme of God's salvation plan, right? And that's when I realized that, okay, she's not just an ordinary human being. There is so much, her obedience especially is
Mm-hmm.
something that you think about it. No one, it's a single act of obedience that changed the whole world, and that really instilled in me actually a desire to be more obedient. In fact, I uh, obedient to God's commands, that we all know. But even when it comes to understanding authority and understanding obedience to authority, maybe to your spiritual elders and so on. Because I'm not a very obedient person. I've been in ministry for so many years, but I wasn't always obedient. I always had
Okay.
my differences with the, with the people above me. Um, and I think when I read this and I saw the obedience, I just realized, wow, the obedience of one person
Yeah.
has made such an impact on history, on humanity, right? I mean, without that act of obedience, we wouldn't have had Jesus. Um,
Yeah.
just like without the disobedience of Eve, we wouldn't have had sin probably, or the disobedience of Adam and Eve together, we wouldn't have had sin. But that one person's obedience, Mary's obedience to God, and that really has made a profound effect on my life, because when I look at it, I understand why it's important to be obedient to God's commands. It's so important to follow His laws. And a lot of times we look at it as, okay, these are laws to be obeyed and so on, but I look at it as like, it's not really about the laws so much as it is about my heart trying to be open to the Father. And that's really what Mary embodies, right? She's being open to the uncertainties. She's being open to the to all the other things that may come along with her choice of obedience, and very difficult things she had to undergo. And it's not just about explaining to people how she's pregnant without a husband, but it also goes down to being, when she knows that she's going to bear Christ, she also knows that there's going to be a lot of suffering that's going to going to follow. She gets to know that at the time of his pregnancy. So many things, and she's still obedient throughout. And even now, she's still obedient to the Father, and she intercedes for her children. And
Mm.
all these things really have made a really profound effect on me. So for me, getting to know that she's a new Eve and she gets that name because of her obedience is really it has been really impactful for me.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like something that we can take back. Something that I think all of us should definitely look toward and really look into our own lives. I would say, and see, where are the areas that we could possibly build upon? Where are the areas that we could, make better? And I think, in all of this, what we can definitely take away is the understanding that Mary is someone who had a strong devotion toward God. She had a strong faith in His plan for her, and as a result, she was obedient because she trusted Him. And and I think that is something that we should strive toward. I know that, yeah, there may be times that being obedient might be difficult, and
Mhm.
I guess that's human, our human nature to feel like that. But I think if we were to really compare our lives with what Mary would have gone through, that should give us that hope that, I mean, if she could go through all of that, and in comparison to what we may be going through, it's definitely possible. And I think she could definitely be somebody whom we can um, have as an example, that there is a lot to look forward to out there, because and all we really need is just to be obedient. And that is something that I think will really help us to cling on to, and really help us to get through whatever it is we may be going through in our lives. So, and another thing that really struck me with this is the fact that, and I'm going to keep saying this, I guess, is that what truly inspires me more than anything with Mary, with Mama Mary, is that obedience in her. And I feel like, if we as people, live our lives in obedience to whatever happens around us, that actually makes us a better person. And when we become a better person, it changes our way of thinking of things. It changes our way and our actions toward other people. And I think that is what will slowly draw us to really living out, the call that Jesus even asked us to go toward, which is, to be there for one another, to love one another, as much as we love God. And I don't know, just really make our lives, I think, a little better than how we may be living right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, the obedience of Mary did so much good. So imagine each of us being obedient to God, right?
Yeah,
How much,
exactly.
how much, how much it can also, do the same, has the same effect. So obedience has that effect. Yeah, so I totally agree with everything that you were saying about how it really impacts everyone around us, not just ourselves. And that's where all it really means to be a Christian, not just look at ourselves, but also look at the people around. And yeah.
Yep, exactly, exactly. All right. So Byron, would you have any final words for us? Any words of encouragement? Anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, I just, for those of you, who are a little bit on the fence about Mother Mary, I would really strongly encourage you, and maybe this podcast could be a starting point for you if you haven't really dwelled too much on Mother Mary. I think this is. It's great to know our mother. She's our mother, so it's great to know her. It's really important for us to know her as Catholics, especially. And there are so many graces that can be that each of us can receive by asking Mother Mary for her intercession. And like we were talking about Mother, there's something that came to my mind about Mary Undoer of Knots. Is that Andrea, my wife, has a great devotion to Mary Undoer of Knots, not just because she's got curly hair and she wants those knots to be but also because it's really helped her undo a lot of lots in her life. And
Mm,
probably I'll let her tell her story at some point of time. But yeah, that's those devotions, whether it be the Rosary for those who are struggling with purity, or whether it is the devotion to Mary Undoer of Knots, or any other Marian devotion. It's not only about the devotion; it's about the devotion to the person herself. Um, it's an amazing thing to know about her. So please, those of you who are starting to know about Mother Mary, please read more about her, pray more to her, because it's really going to make an impact in your life. I can assure you of that.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Byron, for being here today.
Thank you.
And oh, definitely. And yeah, please say hi to Andrea as well from me. And really thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and understanding, and really taking us through this journey of understanding Mama Mary a little better than I think most of us may already know. So thank you again, and God bless.
Thank you, Lisa. God bless everyone.
And to all of you listening, thank you so much for joining me in this episode of The Listful Soul, a devotion to Mary. If you enjoyed this podcast or wish to send along a question or maybe even have a friendly critique, drop me an email at listfulsoulpodcast@gmail.com. The music in the introduction and the close of this podcast was composed by Garreth Demello, and the artwork in my podcast logo and episode was designed by Anahita Ray and Michelle Fernandes, respectively. You can check them out on their social media handles mentioned below. Do spread the word of my podcast via your social media handles, and let's bring more souls closer to Him. See you on the next episode. Until then, stay blessed.